General Daniel Chappie James Jr., the first African American four-star general in the armed forces. Daniel Chappie James Jr. commissioned in the United States Air Force as a pilot and was the first black to reach the rank of four-star general in the United States Armed Forces. He was the youngest of 17 children and born on February 11th, 1920, in a segregated Pensacola, Florida. This was near the Pensacola Naval Air Station when equal rights were still a distant dream. His father was Daniel and his mother was Lily Anna Brown James. Daniel James Sr. worked for the Pensacola City Gas Company while his mother, Lily Anna James, was a high school teacher who established a private school for her own and other black children in Pensacola, Florida. His mother would continue to run the little Lily A. James School until her death at the age of 82. In his teens, James pointed to a plane flying above his home and said, "One day I'm going to fly." His friends quickly reminded him of his one handicap: he was black. He never allowed racism to get in his way. However, he knew that someday he would fly. Encouraged by his school teacher, his mother, and hard-working father, he pushed a coal dolly in the local gas plant. James decided to prepare his bags of knowledge by going off to study in Alabama after graduating from Washington High School. His first assignment was at Selfridge Field's the 477th Bombardment Group to train in B-25s. His unit was completely segregated, and the men, many of them recently returning combat veterans, resented these arrangements. The unit moved to the Freeman Field in Indiana, where an incident occurred that drew national attention. A group of African American officers went into a white officers club and subsequently were arrested and charged with mutiny and disobedience of orders. Over 100 black officers, including Lieutenant James, went into custody after they refused to sign a directive that legitimized separate facilities for black and white officers. Lieutenant James acted as a courier between the arrested airmen and the outside world during this incident. He worked with William T. Coleman, a future Secretary of Transportation, and Coleman Young, the future mayor of Detroit. Their lawyer was the future Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. The resulting negotiations prompted Secretary of War Henry Stimson to declare that no longer could separation of military personnel be based on race in the use of facilities, including officers' clubs. It proved to be a great victory for African American equality. As one of the famed Tuskegee Airmen, James's unit was a part of the government-sponsored civilian pilot training program, an all-black unit whose members were kept separated from their white counterparts. In an era of enforced segregation in the armed forces, James continued to achieve despite racial bias. He fought in both Korean and Vietnam wars, flying over 160 combat missions and leading the Bolo MiG sweep of 21 communist aircraft. This was the highest total kill of any Vietnam air mission. James spent his years gaining combat experience at Air Force bases at home and overseas. When he returned to the United States after his Vietnam assignment, he took command of the 72nd Fighter Training Wing in the Libyan Arab Republic in 1969. Afterwards, however, James moved briefly into public affairs, and it was in this role as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense of Public Affairs that he gave his most public contributions in service. As an effective and thoroughly professional Air Force spokesman, he spoke out not only on military policies, but also on racial policies. No matter how outspoken James was in favor of desegregation, what most people recall from his speeches is his deep patriotism and commitment to duty. Among His numerous awards is the 1970 Arnold Air Society Eugene M. Zuckert Award for Outstanding Contributions to Air Force Professionalism. The citation for the honor says it all, proclaiming James a fighter pilot with a magnificent record, public speaker, and eloquent spokesman for the American dream we so rarely achieve. After he pinned on his fourth star, Air Force General Daniel James Jr. summed up his thoughts on his years of military service with this quote: "I fought in 3 wars, and 3 more wouldn't be too many to defend my country. I love America, and as she has weaknesses or ills, I'll hold her hand." The first African American service member to reach the rank of full general, Chappie James, at the time of his promotion in 1975. He was also named commander of the North American Air Defense Command, or NORAD. With this responsibility, he was in control of all aspects of air defense in the United States and Canada. James married his wife, Dorothy Watkins James, on November 3, 1942, and had 3 children. He retired February 1, 1978, because of health problems, and died 27 days later on February 25, 1978, at the age of 58, at the Air Force Academy Hospital near Colorado Springs, Colorado. Apparently, he suffered a heart attack. His wife, Dorothy, died in 2000 and is buried with him in Arlington National Cemetery. General Daniel Chappie James Jr., the first black 4-star general of the United States Armed Forces.